Good evening. How's everybody?
Great.
Dr. Kate, I see that you're doing a good job with Matt. I hope that's going well. I'm glad that we have found somebody that he responds to. I'm happy to hear about that. He's getting some work ready. That's great.
Chicken outline and all.
I beg your pardon?
Very strategic.
I can't. All right, what time is it? It's not quite time to start yet. Anybody have anything they want to share this week that exciting that has happened?
Can you hear me now?
Nope. No, we got too much static. Students would prefer that would be me rather than you, I think. So we got to get that fixed.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you now.
I can share something that happened.
Share something good. We want to
Hi.
hear something good.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, I got my my vaccine on Saturday, my first dose. So I think that is good because my school, we have a lot going on in our school. This is like the third one since last week. So I'm glad I'm face-to-face and virtual at the same time. So I'm kind of happy that we got our shots. Most of us got our shots so far. So that's good.
Good. I am.
Can you hear me now? Does my
Yes.
stuff work now? Okay, perfect. So let me tell you like something I dealt with today, I guess. So, you know, we've been in school since August. I have JROTC students and they're the ones who put the flags out every morning. And yesterday I was in a principal's meeting and I got a text message from a parent telling me that I know that the flag was upside down on the flagpole. And of course, that has hit the news station and the news wants to know if we are doing in protest for the election. Is that why we did it? And of course, you know, thank God I have a great PIO. And she said, you know, we try to put students in great leadership positions and sometimes they make an error. So
Yeah.
big to do today.
But you're not allowed to make an error.
No, and don't you know that one joke on it says you had one job. They had one job. So
was to put the flag right side up. Yeah, one job.
Yeah, one job. So if you see my school in the news, or if you see that on the news, it's my school. So there you go.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll make the national news. Somebody will appropriate that for their narrative.
Yes.
I did learn
So-
something new about cyberbullying this week, or just
What?
the whole social media. I didn't know children could do the whole sexting thing using Pinterest. So that's
Yep.
kind of ruined Pinterest for me.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of cases of that during virtual learning, and the kids are figuring out ways to get around different things. So that's a new one for me.
Yep. And that's why I said you can't, that sexting business, that's a biggie, and they'll figure out a way around filters and And you know, so you can't just say, we'll keep a lid on it. No, you're going to have to deal with it. They'll find a way. And again, not to point out how smart I am, because y'all already know the contrary to that, but now you realize, I don't know that I pointed this out last week, and I may have, you realize that presentation that I showed you last week is 10 years old this spring, about what what was coming. That wasn't a recap of what's happening in 2021. That was in 2010, 11, telling people what was going to be coming. Now, somebody says, well, Dale, you don't seem that smart, and I will agree with that. How'd you know that was coming? Data. We were putting together, I hired a criminologist, and we were putting together data patterns and doing some prediction models of what schools needed to be focused on. You know, when you have that helpful living conference that day, it's not just a recap of current data, it's basically current trends, what you can expect. The keynote speaker up at that one is always, you know, looking to the future and all that, what you can expect, what's on the horizon, where are we going? And that was a look into the future from 10 years ago. So unfortunately, I turned out to be Nostradamus, but that's probably the nicest thing I'll be called today. But unfortunately, that's the way it goes. We could see where the data was going even back then. And so, unfortunately, yes, sexting is a thing now. They'll find a way to do that. And that never ends well. Never, ever ends well. All right, so we'll go ahead and dive in tonight. So I have finally found what I'm looking for here. If I can turn the page. All right, very good. All right, hold 1 second and I'll be right back with you. Had to get my tea. Oh, I got my shot Friday. I don't know if I told y'all or not. I got my shot Friday. So, and my wife got hers Monday, so we're good. And thanks to Dr. Maraglia for helping us out with that. We went over to Gaston County.
We
You got the Johnson & Johnson one?
I got the Pfizer.
Okay, so you had to get both doses.
Yeah, I got to get both doses. Got to get both. But I'm glad it wasn't Moderna.
I got my second yesterday.
Good. How's that going?
Well, today I ran a fever, but it was okay.
The second dose, you have more side effects. And if you get the Moderna, they're much worse than the Pfizer. That's what the CDC data, I looked at it. And so hopefully it won't be too bad. The second time around, a buddy of mine got his as well. He went Monday as well this week and got his. And so we've all had the same as when you get the flu shot. As I said, I got a pneumonia shot this year and it was much worse than the flu shot. So hopefully it won't be too bad the second time around. And of course, Gardner Webb, their faculty is, our faculty at Gardner Webb, we're going to get one for the faculty. They're going to offer them Friday, not out at the college. I mistakenly thought that they're going to offer them over at Cleveland Community College on Friday for the Gardner Webb faculty. So it's going to be Moderna, I think, and it's going to be over. Yeah, I know it's going to be Moderna. It's going to be over at Cleveland Community College. But hopefully, the point is hopefully if we all get vaccinated, and we had a faculty meeting today, and they said if you choose not to, but you can't work remote. Hopefully we're going to be kind of back to normal, and hopefully we're going to be able to do at least by summer, if not spring, we'll be back to kind of normal on graduation and some of those kinds of things. And so I'm hoping that we'll get to do that again. And so we'll see how that goes. But that's good news, and I'm glad everybody's doing well. And that welcome back, Dominique. Dominique's been a little under the weather, and we're glad that she's back with us tonight. Glad to see her back.
Thank you.
It's been tough for everybody. Make sure that you add our classmate Cassandra to your prayer list. She's a little under the weather, different problem, but just as serious. And so we're praying for her as well. So it's been a tough time. Last year's been really tough, but we're all struggling and muddling through, and I appreciate y'all sticking with us. And so tonight, let me share my screen and let's get started. Ooh, we need to get moving on here. I'm taking too much time to get started tonight. So looking at our weekly schedule, let me see what this question is. Okay. Oh, LaQuisha, I'm so sorry. Prayers for LaQuisha as well. She's had a tragedy in her family today. And we're so sorry. And we'll pray for you. We'll add you to the prayer list too. It's just tough times, folks. You know, this year started out with my mother getting COVID, losing my mother. She was 90, but it's not gotten any better the whole year. It's just gotten, it's just continued. But so, LaQuisha, I know how it goes. And so my prayers for you. Tough times, but prayer helps. We'll get through it. Prayers for everybody. So let's catch up where we are. We are on March the 3rd, week 8. This is the halfway point of our course this spring. Next week, we won't have class. And we always schedule it that way so that you can get a good start on your skip next week. Many of you have already started. You should be wrapping up. You should be into your discussion boards on intervention teams and IEP teams, meeting with those, attending those meetings if you can. The 2 points to remember, and I'll be brief on intervention teams, is know what your school and district offers, and make sure that your school is offering that. When you talk to them, you do a little mini audit when you interview your intervention team chair. Because of COVID, again, and Dr. Gaten has shared this as well, and Dr. Maraglia, we were all supposed to be fully up to speed on MTSS, which is our intervention program. We were all supposed to be up to speed, but we've gotten delayed. And so we're at various places. Intervention is the 90 days, up to 90 days prior to the official 90 days of the process for identification for exceptional children's services. So when a kid gets referred to an intervention team, traditionally there's been 90 days of first 30 days of anecdotals, then 30 days of the first strategy or intervention, and then 30 more days of that one or another one. And then at the end of 90 days, you make a testing decision. Well, now we're adding up to another 90 before that of multi-level interventions. Now, not everybody's to the full 90 before the 90, which is 180 total. Some people are still at the 30, some are at 60, some are at 90, and then the 90. Everybody's at the official EC 90, which is required by federal law, that when a kid gets referred, everybody does the 90, but we're at various places on the MTSS scale. You need to know what your school district, where you are, and what you're offering, and here's the reason why. As I've told you, EC, you have a EC department chair, you have a compliance technician, and you have the head of the EC department. They are your buffer, there to make sure that compliance happens for exceptional children's programs, head count, and all those things. Manifestation terminations, you know, the reavals on IAPs and all those kinds of things. The intervention teams are what the state refers to in North and South Carolina as school-based committees. That means that the principal is the person responsible there. So if your district says a kid gets 90 days prior to the 90 days and he doesn't get that 90 days, you haven't done any levels of intervention with him at your school, it won't come back to the EC department. It'll come back to you as the principal. It'll come back to your office. You are in charge of the intervention process. So when a child is referred for behavior or academic problems, you've got to know, what does my district say that we have to do for X number of days before we start the official 90 days that leads up to EC testing or not EC testing. What are we doing in our district? What am I supposed to be doing at my school? And are we doing that? And if you don't make sure that that happens, it won't happen just because you want it to. You have to supervise that. So you need to know, what goes on in your building or what's supposed to go on in your building per your district responsibilities or policies. And is that happening? Because that is completely on the school administrator. That's completely on you as the principal. There is no buffer. There is no EC department chair. There is no compliance technician. There is no EC department. That's the buffer for you. If that's not happening and you get sued, that's completely on you as a school-based committee. So that's your takeaway on intervention teams. Your takeaway on IEP meetings, and this one is a hard pill to swallow for some folks, especially school administrators. It doesn't matter how much work the staff, including the EC department and the regular ed teachers, have done in developing that IEP proposal. It doesn't matter. In the end, the decision about what goes in that IEP is a collaborative decision with the parent. Now, that's a hard pill to swallow, because I've had faculty members say to me, I worked so hard on that. I did all this. I did, this is what the kid needs, and the parent won't go along. Sorry, it's a collaborative decision. You just don't come to the IEP meeting and say, here it is, take it or leave it. That's not the way it works. Now, you say, well, Dale, that sounds like a minor. No, that's not a minor point. Some of the worst arguments and the biggest conflicts I've ever seen in my career were in IEP meetings, where the staff felt entitled to have their way. Now, they may have had the best interest of the kids in heart, and they may know 1,000 times better what that kid needs more than their parent does, because they work with them every day and their parent's not a professional. That doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. That IEP is a collaborative process. And even though you did all the hard work, all the paperwork, you did all the data dive, you did all the anecdotes, you did everything. You spent hours and hours and days, and the parents, showed up an hour late and unprepared. Doesn't matter. It's a collaborative process. And that's what you've got to see, is how that give and take is supposed to work. That's why it's good to attend those meetings and see that relationship, see how that communication develops, or unfortunately, how that conflict develops. You need to see how that works. Now, I've worked with some people in EC. I'm thinking specifically of a group that I had. Helen pointed out, when it's time for them to move them to high school, and the EC staff and the gen ed staff at the middle school or the elementary recommends an OCS track, which is a non-diploma track, and the parent wants them to get a high school diploma. I want my hair to grow back. That ain't happening either. We got to be realistic here. But what I mean is the staff is usually data driven. The parent is driven by their emotion and what they want. If we put him in that class, that'll make him normal. No, that's not how it works. But I'm thinking about staffs that I work with. I've worked with some staffs that were really good and really good at being able to sit down and communicate with that parent and negotiate that IEP. I've worked with other staffs that just came in and said, this is it. You don't know what you're talking about. We're the professionals in the room. Very arrogant, and it just became a conflict every time. And you need to see that relationship, and sometimes the bad example, you learn more from those than the good example. I know I did. I mean, what happens is you walk in where it all goes well, and you don't notice how hard and how gifted the staff was when they get buy-in and communication and consensus. So you have one that can't do that. Then you realize, oh, this is really a skill. These people really were. I didn't realize how good I had it. When I was at New Hope, I had a great staff, and they were really good at it. And then I went to the next place along the line, same grade level, middle school. I went to the next place, and they were awful. It was a pitch battle every time. So that's what we hope that you take away from these two things, from watching an IEP meeting and talking to your intervention team chair. But that's what we have. I'm going to call on my two principals, the two resident experts with us. They'd like to add anything to those two takeaways for those two activities for our students to discuss.
Also,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Kane.
I was going to say, just, also be careful what you promise within an IEP, especially if it involves like something that the district is going to have to do. Don't just say, oh, yeah, we're going to do this for, the parent or for the student. Be very careful about that because it could be involving monies or a position or something like that you really do not have control over. So be very careful of that. I have great EC staff. My background is EC, so I generally, of course, any hot topics I'm going to be, or parents, I'm going to be the one who's going to do them. And generally, I have a pretty good way of smoothing them out and about what needs to be done and all that good stuff. And I have great EC teachers, who, do like you were saying, collaborative, IEPs and goals ahead of time, or, make adjustments and things like that. So, you get lucky when you get a good EC staff that does those type of things.
Absolutely.
And I was just going to say, this is coming from a sort of a different standpoint, but I have found this to be some of the best advice I've gotten in my career. I read something at one point that please always remember that no matter how good your relationship is with the parent when you're going into that IEP meeting, IEP meetings are hard for them because no matter what, you're talking about what their child can't do, the struggles that their child has. And when I read that, I always try to go into the meetings now with that in mind and trying to keep that level of compassion no matter what, because it's hard, because nobody has a child thinking, oh, okay, I want them to have an IEP and have struggles in school. And it's hard. And just to keep that level of compassion there as you're in that meeting with them.
Excellent. 2 points to follow up on that. What Dr. Caton said, usually the conflict arises in IEP meetings when the parent is asking for something that the district can't provide. So you need to know what the district can and can't provide. But like they'll ask for a one-on-one. Well, what if your district doesn't do one-on-one? Or they'll ask for a homeschool instructor. Well, what if your district doesn't do homeschool instruction? Except for the most severe and profound cases. Or what if homebound is only for up to, one of the districts I worked in, they would only do homebound for up to 30 days. We want it all the time. Well, our district doesn't offer that. And you have to be the person, your LEA representative many times has to be the person, what Dr. Kate's talked about. She fulfills the role of LEA representative and say, no, we don't offer that. We can't give you that. It's not that we don't think you deserve it. We just don't offer that. And so that's where a lot of the conflict comes in. And so you as the LEA representative has to know what your district will and won't authorize. You can't write something in an IEP that they don't provide. That won't go well. Then you'll have to tell the parent. They won't do that for you. And to Dr. Maraglia's point is one of the things that I used to have to tell teachers all the time when it came to EC parents. And I hate to say this, but it's just the truth. If it comes down to a choice between you and their child, they will rip your heart out and show you your beating heart while you die. Don't think that this person that's been your room parent and your best parent and most supportive, but when it comes down to a choice between you and them, it's really hard, and they'll pick their child over you. So don't get yourself in those conflict situations where it's communicate, do your work up front, but still understand that they may be emotional and they may not be exactly rational or fair or even-handed or equitable in their treatment of you or their demands for their child. That's just not going to happen. And my final thought on that.
I would say one more thing, if you don't mind, is that if they ever walk in with a lawyer, go ahead and stop your meeting and wait for yours to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Every district pretty much has that, except for the smaller ones. Thank you for reminding me. I forget, I worked in small places. That was the standing policy in the larger districts like Pitt or Charlotte Mecklenburg. If they come to the lawyer, you stop, and we had a lawyer on retainer that would come. Associate General Counsel would be there in just a few minutes. But no, don't think, well, they just brought that lawyer for form's sake. No, there's a reason why they brought that lawyer, and so stop right there. And my final thought on EC is, full disclosure, I think I am EC, but that's why I kind of get it, but maybe not. Hopefully not. anyway, not to make light of that, but it's a tough situation. And it's going to take all your skill to get through those situations. And it's not just one thing ever. It's pretty much a daily thing. And it's going to be tough. All right. So, start your skip. I'm sharing my screen. Please remember that over here, I've got a section called skip, task, and prompts. I've got your task and prompts. Remember, there is no template for the skip. You have to build your own out of the task and prompts. I've got 2 good examples for you here. And remember, here's the partial graphic organizer to put in your template for task 2. And here's the full one to put in task 3. So between these right here, this is all you should need to build your skip. Now, building a template will take you 15 minutes. Just copying the directions and the prompts, make sure that they're there. Make it easy for your reader. You know, that's the biggest problem we have with the skip. The biggest problem that we have with the skip is people want a shortcut. They just want to start writing. No, copy the directions, the task, and the prompts all the way through, and then put your narrative in, just like the ones that you've been given before you. Same thing. Don't change the game now. Make it easy for your reader or your evaluator. And you say, well, if they're evaluating, they should know what it doesn't matter. Make it easy for them. Make sure you have your headings. This is what you're going to write about. Don't change the process. We're conditioning them just like you do early readers. You know, it's called anticipatory set with beginning readers. Those of you who are in primary grades, elementary, you know what anticipatory set is. We used to use them in my era in the Dick and Jane books. We use rhymes to get kids to anticipate the next word. Well, we do the same thing with our evaluators. You get better scores using anticipatory set. That's why we have the task and the prompts and the directions right there, and they know, and the section headings, and they know what they're going to read. Don't deviate from the process. It works, and you'll get good scores. I mean, the scores have been excellent with this group. And you can see you didn't need all that extra stuff that we've given you. You figured it out on your own now. You're getting great scores. Don't get lazy. Make you a good template so it's easy for your reader. All right. So our first group tonight in our second case study on school funding, the first group that goes tonight, and I'll stop my share, was the group that went last, which would be Brad, Brian, Chris, and Sharina. Is that correct?
That is.
All right, fire away.
All right, let's see if I can get my screen to share correctly. All right. Can y'all see that?
We can.
All right, cool.
All right, a little background on the case. So last school year, a student-based budgeting system, or SBB, was piloted at 4 schools to enhance equity in funding decisions. Student-based budgeting systems allocates money directly to schools based on 2 criteria: the number of students enrolled and the specific needs of those students. Predetermined weights on needs, such as grade levels or at-risk learners, turn into dollar amounts. SBB system is being rolled out district-wide this year because the old formula did little to address students and students' diverse needs. In previous years, dollars were given based on factors such as the number of students and staffing ratios. The district is putting dollars behind the stated goals to empower school leaders, and the schools are committed to transparent budget decisions that work in the best interest of the children.
Okay. So a little background about the Leandro case. So this started in 1994, where 5 school districts in low wealth counties filed a lawsuit against North Carolina, basically saying that their school districts did not have enough funding to provide an equal or equitable education. So they basically said, well, they cannot compete with these wealthier districts that can provide extra pay or extra bonuses or supplemental pay for their teachers. So they argue that the quality of students' education should not be dependent on wealth of a family or a community, and propose that their proposed solution was that higher funding for low wealth counties. Well, the urban districts came back and argued and said, well, hey, we have higher concentrations of disadvantaged students. Therefore, it's going to cost us more to educate those students. And looking at the North Carolina Constitution, it says that states are required to provide all schools with adequate resources to fully educate disadvantaged students. So basically what the court findings stated is that neither school districts or counties have constitutional right to the equal funding. So the state must provide equal funding for every student, but counties could supplement funding how they choose. So based off of, what, taxpayers have decided and, working with the county commissioners, that's on them. The state must provide that basic education, and then it's up to the counties to do whatever else they want. So, and if we look at what a sound basic education is, that means classrooms with those competent, certified, well-trained teachers, schools led by competent, well-trained principals, and resources necessary to support effective instructional programs. So that is what the state said is considered the sound basic education. And so the state of North Carolina must deliver every child's Leandro rights, no exceptions. And they have to use, and if they do anything different, that has to come from local funding for spending for educational programs, not state funding, because that goes with that child. So this next diagram is just to show you that this is still happening, going on now. It started in '94 and all the way up to now, the Leandro case keeps getting debated. I was telling them earlier, serving on the North Carolina Governor's Advisory Teacher Committee, every time we meet and the governor speaks with us, Leandro case gets brought up about things that they are still, changing or doing. So even though this started in '94, this is still a continuous thing that they're still working on.
All right, the pros of the superintendent's plan. Parents and community members are involved in the process. Budget decisions are transparent. Funding for students will be equitable instead of equal based on their needs, which levels the playing field. Administrators can properly distribute money and not worry about a shortage. Money is following the student. The school can implement an effective MTSS program. More students' needs can be addressed with a variety of resources and programs that target the deficits, such as after-school tutoring, Saturday Academy, iReady, Study Island, manipulatives, technology, books, educational trips, etc. Specialists can be hired to assist with their learning, such as a math or reading interventionist, behavior specialist, L teacher, etc. More staff development opportunities. School goals can be achieved, higher student engagement and increased confidence levels. Proficiency and growth rates will increase, which leads to a better school report card and a better rapport with parents and the community.
So before I discuss the cons, the group did agree that, it is morally responsible to try to help at-risk students achieve academic success. But the problem here with this case study is that the superintendent's plan does not align with the state law as defined in the Leandro case. So there are two different ways you can look at this. First of all, the SBB is illegal because it's the state of North Carolina, not the local school district, who has the ultimate constitutional obligation to deliver the Leandro right to that opportunity of a sound basic education. So basically the districts cannot manipulate the state money. And also, even if they could, this is still bad policy. So even if the county commissioner was to sign off on something like this, academically, the superintendent can't assume that administrators are going to use the funds properly. In other words, there's no guarantee that this money is going to follow the most at-risk students. And politically, parents of those students who are not receiving those additional supports are bound to be upset and cause some sort of backlash. So basically, in all bold there at the bottom, our decision was to align with the Leandro decision that says the state will give every district a flat per pupil allotment that cannot be manipulated. No exceptions, no excuses.
And then these are the references we used.
That is correct. Now, you'll notice they had a list of pros a whole page long. It doesn't matter. The slide before that one, it doesn't matter because it's illegal. The Leandro ruling, and I freely acknowledge I was on the other side. You know, my side, I've worked for the, I work for the, you know, the side of the angels here, the low wealth people trying to get this changed, but now we lost. Now you say, well, Dale, it's just our, it's not about, you know, which side I was on or what. In the end, nobody can give you permission to break the law. So in the end, let me go back here. Let me see. Let me share my screen. And I can stop my share. Let me get some of this stuff off my screen. So in the end, you have to understand the state gives a per pupil. It's up to about $8,000 per pupil now. They deduct your attendance rate. So if you've got 95% attendance, you get 95% of the $8,000, which is $760. 10 times during the year, you don't get it. That's a modified accrual accounting system. But again, that has to go to, it follows, it has to go where the state intended it, because what does 95% of the state funds do? It buys teachers, pays teachers salary. So it has to go where the students are. We can't manipulate it. Okay, we know we can't manipulate federal money. Everybody understands that you can't move federal money around. If you can't, so why can't we move local money around? Well, there's two reasons why we can't move local money around too. Number one, there's not that much local money. What happened in 1966 that wiped out just about all, in the low wealth counties, that wiped out all of their local money that they could have bought teachers with? What happened in 1966? The state got out of what? The state got out of the building business for schools. Remember all the legal cases of that watershed moments for public education? 1966, what happened in North and South Carolina? State stopped building school buildings. And who'd they leave it up to? The capital needs of your district, which is building your buildings and keeping them up. Who has to pay for those now? Brad, you know, are you in Winston-Salem, Forsyth?
Yep, I am.
So in Winston-Salem, Forsyth, which is a higher wealth district, you know, they have enough money to build their schools. They have to let bonds. Their county commissioners have to let bonds. That's how they build new schools. But they have to have a budget from the county commissioner to keep up the existing schools.
Yeah.
They don't, you know, so they might have a little bit of money left over, but they don't have a lot, even in a high wealth district. But somebody who's in a very low wealth district, they're struggling just for their capital needs to keep their buildings open. They don't have extra money to put in educational programs. They're just trying to keep a roof over people's head and the heat on in the wintertime. And so that's why there really aren't any local dollars. And so what did the state say? Well, we'll start an education lottery. But that's not putting any real dollars into public education either. And the other part of that local argument, this happened not this past summer, but the summer before. It's like the world paused for a year. I think about it as last summer, but I have to remember back at summer before. Does anybody work in Chapel Hill, Carborough? You've got a new superintendent there. The last one got fired. And the reason why she got fired in the summer of 2019 is this exact case. She said, we need to get some support to these high-risk kids at certain schools in our district. Basically, the Carborough side of Chapel Hill Carborough School District. Chapel Hill is the more affluent side of the district. Carborough is the less affluent, and you can imagine the demographics. And so she said, we're going to give the kids on Carborough side, we're going to give them more support. We're going to give them more resources, which is she's on the side of the angels here. And then somebody said, well, you know, the county commissioners will never go for that. You know, the people who give us the money, they won't vote for that. You can't move state money. You can't vote federal money. And who decides your local school budget? Remember, school boards are unempowered. They can't levy taxes. You have to go to the town commissioners or the county commissioners in order to get your money for the school. So you have to present them a budget, and they approve it or not, and they go through it by line. And so they would never go for that. So the superintendent said, I'm still going to figure out a way. So what the superintendent did is contracted with a private educational company to provide extra staff to put in those schools to work with those kids to reduce class sizes. Now, the reason why, she couldn't hire extra teachers herself is who hires teachers in a school district? Is it the principal, the superintendent, or the Board of Education? Who lets teacher contracts? That would be the Board of Education. They hire teachers. And so she wanted to hire extra teachers, and they said, no, we don't have the money. So how are you going to do it? If you can't move federal money and you can't move state money, the county commissioners won't vote for it. The school board says, nope, we're not going to hire these people. How do you then get extra resources? And she said, aha, superintendent can spend up to $90,000 discretionary. So I can't hire teachers because that's a recurring expense. What I'll do is I'll hire a private educational company who has people that work for them. I'll hire them. Cost $1 million. And she said, what I'll do is, I can only spend up to $90,000. So what she had them do was divide it up and send her 12 POs and one every month for right at $90,000, like $86,000. Not understanding that was a complete manipulation or workaround or a legal way to spend money. So the first thing that happened, of course, was to see the financial and then the superintendent thereafter. But what she was doing was in direct violation of Leandro. She was that $90,000 discretionary budget that the superintendent has is one time. It's not every month. It's one time every budget cycle. And so now, who do you think pointed that out? Well, it was a grandparent from the Chapel Hill side who was a retired principal from the Chapel Hill side that knew the law and said, aha, this is a violation of state law. This is a violation of Leandro. You can't do this. And she was right. And that was the end of that superintendent's regime. So that everybody doesn't know this is except people in the business. But just like in the case in Chapel Hill, Carborough, there was a principal who knew the law, who knew Leandro, and she had a grandchild in one of the Chapel Hill side of the district schools, and she said, no, this is a violation of Leandro. Made it aware, and next thing you know, the CFO and the superintendent were looking for work. You don't misspend the money but one time, and then they find somebody else. I don't care what position you have in the organization. But she did an end around. Everywhere she went, they denied her to use local funds. Leandro said you can't use state funds. Federal law says you can't use federal funds. But she said, I'm going to find a way anyway. And so she misused the purchase order system, which was a direct violation of the law, which is illegal as well. She violated the modified accrual accounting system and purchase order system in order to try to get this done. Now, what she said was publicly is that, the ends justified the means. Nobody can give you permission to break the law, even if you're on the side of the angels, even if what you're doing it for is absolutely the right thing to do. You can't violate the law, and somebody will know it and somebody will catch you. And so even though what the superintendent wanted to do in this case was just such a wonderful thing in theory, in practice, it's illegal to do it, as this group just pointed out. Excellent job. This is a hard one to understand, and it's even harder to accommodate because you feel so strongly for kids, and you want them to do, you want to get them the support that they need. But you can't break the law to do it, folks. That's the whole idea. And that's what this case study is all about, is that we get caught up. We feel so strongly for kids and for teachers that we want to do the right thing, but we have to do the legal thing always. That's the takeaway from this one. All right, our next group is Megan, Yolanda, Monique, and Kim. Go right ahead.
There we go.
Okay, we first start off with the overview of the case study. In the previous school year, the school district piloted a school-based budgeting system for four schools in the district. The school-based budgeting provides direct money directly to schools based on the number of students enrolled and the needs of those students. After getting feedback from the pilot group principals, the superintendent decided to implement that student-based budgeting system district-wide, and the superintendent is advertising the student-based budgeting system as having the money to follow students and having schools to make transparent budgeting decisions that work in the best interest of students.
Just to kind of give you an overview of the Leandro case, there was a lawsuit filed in 1994 claiming schools weren't providing equal education in less affluent communities. Neither school districts nor counties had any constitutional right to equal funding. North Carolina Supreme Court held that all children have a constitutional right to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education. Also, a sound-based education was also defined within this case. So how does the Leandro case applies to the case study? The school district highlighted in the case study, they determined that there was a need to address equity in education directly to schools based on specific needs of students, in addition to the number of students and staffing ratio as it relates to funding. All schools are not the same, therefore it is inequitable to allot predetermined funding to all students without considering the needs of students relating to socioeconomic status and specific learning needs. Both parties in the case study and the plaintiffs and other urban school districts involved in the Leandro lawsuit recognize that more resources are needed to provide a sound education for all.
All right, for the superintendent pros, the superintendent is communicating to the community and the parents about the budget. So a budget is basically a blueprint to communicate what the district values. The SBB, student-based budgeting, will allow this district to allocate funds equally and with equity based on student educational needs. Better financial decisions, improvement of operations, and involvement of all stakeholders, to ensure that they have a voice in the allocation of funds. There's two levels of compliance when dealing with, financial fiscal planning. There's legal, and then there's fiscal stewardship, which is, means that funds will be used in legal compliance, which is to support student achievement. So the allocated funds will follow the students. Money will be used to target and support stated goals, to empower leaders, and decisions will be made with the students' best interest as priority.
So even though there are some pros with an SBB process, there obviously are some cons. Additional resources can help schools. However, if principals are not good instructional leaders, then it is really difficult to implement those evidence-based programs in your school when you do have that additional funding. I know in our school district, we are the renewal school district for North Carolina. And so all of our funds are, like charter schools, go into one pot. So our schools and our school leaders have to be very mindful that they get it all in one big chunk. And, it is really difficult to help manage, those funds between, your salaries and, your various instructional programs and your various student populations. So they do need to be good instructional leaders, when they're dealing with these types of additional funds. The SBB does not target specific needs. So the SIT needs team, or our, we call it teacher-led design team, needs to be strong when creating their strategic plan to make sure money is being utilized to meet the needs of all students and create really strong instructional programs. Some schools are going to lose funds with this type of model, but in the end, regardless of all of the pros that are out there with this type of program, SBB goes against, the Leandro ruling. So SBB overall is not a good program or a good practice due to the ethical and the legal standing with Leandro.
Excellent. So let's point out a couple of things from this presentation that was in the last, but I'll wait for this one. Basic education. In 1984, North Carolina passed the basic ed plan, said every child gets a basic education. It didn't say you get a grade, good, superior. You only get basic. That's it. That's all the state is obligated to fund, is basic. Yes, we freely acknowledge if we gave you more, you could do better, but we only have to fund basic, because that's what the basic ed plan of 1984 says. And we spent 5 years from 1984 to 1989, as I told you earlier when we covered relevant court cases. We spent 5 years and we developed a standard course of study, because somebody said, what is a basic education? We said, well, we'll define it for you. So they hired all these people at DPI and made all these big, thick white notebooks, if any of you are old enough to remember them. And they were the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And so that's where that came from. And then somebody said, in 89, somebody said, well, how do we know they're getting that? We have said they get a basic education. We've defined it. Now, how do we make sure they're getting it? That's when we started the accountability. It initially was called performance-based accountability, PBAC. Then it became the report card system, North Carolina Accountability System, state report card. But that's the whole notion here, is the state of North Carolina and South Carolina only fund a basic education. They freely acknowledge that you can put more with it and get better. But there's no legal right to that, because they don't want to have to be the one that funds it. When you say, well, they're giving the same to everybody, well, they're talking about there's no legal right to the same. They give the basic amount $8,000. And as I told you before, places like Charlotte Mecklenburg can add another $4,000 to that, on top of what they spend on capital, on buildings and keeping them up. They can spend another $4,000 per pupil for a total of 12. But, places like Hope County can only spend 8. And so what they're saying is, as long as we're going to give you enough for a basic, and that's all you're guaranteed legally, there's no legal right to the same amount that in Hope County is in Charlotte Mecklenburg. Now, what the low wealth counties, as I told you, and Leandro wanted, was district power equalized. That's what they were looking for. What they wanted to do was take and give Charlotte Mecklenburg 6 and give, and they would add their 4 to it, and they would have 10,000 for their students, and then they would give, take the 2 that they took from Charlotte Mecklenburg, you give it to Hope, and so they would add that to their 8, so they would have 10. So in the end, the kids in Charlotte Mecklenburg would get 10, and the kids in Hope would get 10. Except the people in Charlotte Mecklenburg would be paying that extra 2,000 on the kids over in Hope County, and that obviously that would not go well. And so that's what we're talking about. Even though we have a flat grant system where every kid, every district gets 8,000 per pupil, locals can add more to that can afford it. They can add more. And what the low wealth people were saying is we ought to get that much. The state ought to give it to us, and if you can't afford it, take it from them and give it to us. Well, you can imagine how well that went over. But again, in 1984, remember, Leandro started in 1994. Remembering what is the standard? 1984, the standard was determined as the basic ed plan, that North Carolina and South Carolina would only provide a basic education and would fund that. And that's it. And so the Leandro ruling, the Leandro case, was basically challenging the constitutionality of the 1984 basic ed plan. That's what it was. It's kind of like, if you know anything about the Scopes trial, the Scopes trial was actually a put-up job. about teaching evolution. It was actually a court case to challenge the constitutionality of the Butler Amendment in Tennessee. You know, that's what it was. Same thing. The Leandro case is actually 10 years down the road, was a case to challenge the constitutionality of 1984's Basic Ed Plan, that amendment to the state constitution, and it failed for whatever reason. But that's, you know, if you understand history, how the Scopes trial worked, you get it. This was exactly the same thing. They were challenging the constitutionality of the Basic Ed Plan that passed in '84. All right, excellent. So our next group is Rachel and Helen, and they sent me theirs earlier. And I loved it, by the way. They're the dynamic duo.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
I can.
Okay,
Okay,
fantastic.
can you hear
I can hear you, Rachel.
All right. So with this case study number 2, which is the student-based budgeting proposal from the superintendent, of course, Helen and I like to look at the case study holistically and figure out what is relevant and what is not relevant before we even kind of start discussing things. And right off the bat, we noticed that within the superintendent's proposed plan, obviously both federal and state level funding would have to be manipulated, and therefore it is illegal. With allocating a set amount of money to travel with students from K-12. The SBB had already been piloted within 4 schools. However, this is probably more than likely with district local funding. Therefore, the superintendent is being anything but transparent. So unless they'd already gone and spoken to county commissioners and had that plan approved for the piloting, that too was also illegal. To implement countywide, the paradigms of legality and policy would be negatively impacted. In terms of obviously legality, it is illegal based off of state and federal funding, and then policy having to do with your county commission and going behind their back and using money in a negative or in a dishonest way.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the non-relevant information that we pulled from the case that was shared was that the administrators at the other 4 pilot schools provided feedback. That's not relevant. We don't care because illegal is illegal. The projected positive attributes of SBB and use across the country. The allusion to basically the stakeholder being included. Sorry, I have 2 dogs, don't mind them. The wording of transparent used in the letter should not have been said or used. And we only said that because the relationship with our stakeholders is always supposed to be transparent. Therefore, we shouldn't even have to say we are being transparent with you. It should already be established as a piece of the culture. And if it's not, that's a concern.
I told you I love this presentation. Now look, this is the dynamic duo. See, this is how, I mean, if I have to tell you I'm not a crook, I probably am. I love that.
So once again, just a reminder, illegal is illegal no matter how great the idea is or who it can benefit in the long run.
All right, and then going back into the Leandro law, of course, it was open in 1994 with 5 counties in North Carolina. As other groups have said, they were arguing that these higher than average taxes were not being equitably distributed among students, therefore giving them a lesser education than surrounding districts. So that lower than average tax revenue resulted in these districts having lower teacher pay, less funding for student services, and not appropriate monies for educational materials or resources. The first claim was that a child's education should not be dependent on the wealth of the county to which they reside. And then additional claims came in that said that NC failed to provide adequate educational resources for disadvantaged students. And then the outcomes.
So the case outcome, unfortunately, neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding. However, the court did rule that each North Carolina child had the state constitutional right to receive a sound education that included sufficient ability to read, write, and speak English language, fundamental mathematics, and physical science to enable the student to function in a complex and rapid changing society, which is part of the 21st century learning, if we think about it today. Sufficient fundamental knowledge of geography, history, and basic economic and political systems to enable the student to make informed choices. Sufficient academic and vocational skills to enable the student to successfully engage in continued education. And of course, sufficient academic and vocational skills to enable the student to complete on an equal basis with others. So there's our overall favorite word, equity. We hear it all the time, and we will always hear it. And once again, the Leandro writes, no exceptions, no excuses.
All right, I have a question.
Yes.
When we stay there, I want to ask a question. I love this presentation. I want to ask you, why don't we see anything in there from the state about technology, about guaranteeing technology from the state now, in terms of this is a state ruling? Why don't we see anything about technology in there? Anybody know? I've probably mentioned it and it probably didn't highlight it enough. Why doesn't, when it says you get a sound basic education and they've just defined it for you, why did the state not promise you technology?
Does that fall back on the district?
It does. And why does it fall back on the district?
Would that have to do with equal access to technology in terms of what schools are able to provide, such as like one-on-one devices?
It has to do with who's paying for the technology.
Yeah.
I was just getting ready to say, isn't that because the school districts, the funding for technology comes out of the count? Yeah, okay, sorry.
Got it. Yay, yay. Unfortunately, North Carolina made the decision when they did this, they made the decision that technology is part of capital funding. I can't logically make that leap. I can't figure out why it is. I would say it'd be instructional, wouldn't you? But no, the state ruled back in the 80s that technology is capital. And what did they do in 1966? The state got out of what business? Capital funding. And in the 80s, when the basic ed plan came out in 84 and they said, this is a basic or a sound education. And there was nothing in there about technology, which was even emerging back then. I know y'all don't believe it because some of you weren't even alive back then, but it was already an emerging. We knew that it was going to become a thing. Some of us were already doing, I was one of those math science teachers that they've hired for 12 months, and we were already doing technology in the summertime and getting computers, and we had Apple IIe's and Trash 80s and all that. We already knew where we were going with this. We were already developing software for instruction in physical mathematical sciences. We already knew where it was going. And when this came out, everybody said, well, why is this not the state say that you get basic technology as well? Well, it's real simple. At that point, they declared that technology, buying computers, hardware, putting in networks, wiring, Ethernet cable, all that stuff, they declared that capital. And whose responsibility is it to provide capital? That would be the local. That was their out. And some, 36 years later, after the basic ed plan, it's still that way. So I would argue that that's not a basic education, especially by today's standards. But it's not like they didn't think about technology it was an era of omission. It was an era of commission because they said, we're not signing on to pay for that stuff. And as expensive as it is now, when it first came out, it was brutally expensive. Stuff that cost $1,000 back then costs 50 cents now. I mean, seriously. When I was a freshman at NC State, of course, this tells you how old I am. When calculators first came out, the first calculator was a Hewlett-Packard 25C. My watch will do more than that now, and it's not even a digital watch. It just did add, track, multiply, and divide is all it would do. A Hewlett-Packard 25C, and it cost $500 for the first calculators. Now, that's in early 1970s money. You know how much that's like $10,000 now. But that's what technology costs. And so the state said, oh, no, we're not getting into technology. And so that's been one of the biggest drawbacks of the basic ed plan and Leandro, where it's really showed up is in technology, because local districts have to fund that. And so the state doesn't guarantee that as a part of a child's basic education.
Is that why, I'm sorry, is that why Mark Johnson got in trouble for using money to just buy iPads for one school?
That is correct. The state is not in the state. You can't do that for one and not do it for all, because the state is not in the capital funding business, and all technology is capital. And so that was a misuse of those funds.
And may I say something about that? That
Sure.
was a school in my county, and I watched very closely because I'm a very poor school. I'm the smallest of the 6 high schools, and that school has money like $40,000 that they roll over that they don't use from year to year. And on top of that, they have $30,000 to $40,000 in parking lot money and things like that. So that it really irked me that he gave them that.
Yeah, but that was exactly, but the whole point is the state does not fund capital. He can't give them money legally. The state's not, we'd love for the state to get into capital business. Holy cow, would that not be great? I mean, especially places like where both of our resident principals and I are in very low wealth places. And they would love, I'll guarantee you, they would love for the state to get involved in capital funding and give them technology. But that's not going to happen because of the expense of it. And so, yes, that's exactly what happened. The state cannot fund technology. It's capital, unfortunately. And so, that gate swings both ways. But yeah, that was, well, but that's what happens when you get somebody who's only ever been a substitute teacher and put them in a state superintendent of schools. That's what happens. It's kind of helpful to know anything about the job you're going to take. That's kind of one of the prerequisites for success, you'd think. But that's just what do I know. All right, continue on. Great.
All right, so we said that for every pro within the superintendent's letter, it automatically reflected to a con or a negative. So, of course, the plan appears to address various inequities seen in public school and public education, which it does. You could get better qualified teachers, more literacy specialists, more math intervention teachers, more curriculum coaches, different programs for students. But however, that goes over to the negative.
Of course, there would have to be manipulation of funding allocation, opening up discussion for all stakeholders, including outside community members, which is always important because when it comes to your school is just not who is in the building. It also includes the surrounding community area.
And that went,
go ahead.
That went with the letter opening up the process for the discussion of funding to the stakeholders. So when the superintendent said, we want you to participate in this, we want you to be a part of this. When you open up those gates, you're not just opening it up to stakeholders who are parents. You're opening it up to anyone in the community, someone who may have hidden agendas or a bias or anything like that. You're opening up the floodgates. They're opening up a Pandora box with that. Then, of course, the proposal offers disadvantaged students with opportunities to be taught by the best, highly qualified staff members to meet their individual education needs. However,
district-wide implementation will require personnel changes that may cause morale backlash and not to mention legality issues.
And then, of course, the letter ensures greater confidence that the money will be following students and support them throughout their educational journey within the district. So it kind of alludes to the fact that the money will be assigned to that student and it will travel with them throughout their educational career. But that's impossible because
funding moving with the student is unsustainable with the funds that regulate from year to year. So when Rachel and I were talking about this, so I used to be the 8th grade hall lead, whatever you want to call me. But basically, we used to collect 8th grade dues, and that would go towards their trips that they were going throughout the school year. So when it came to the end of the year, we had money left in the account, and we were asking the financial secretary at the school, where did the money go? Because we were going to use it towards something. And she told us that she went ahead and divided it up to where the kids were going. But then our thing was, okay, you divided up to where the kids were going, but what if those kids that were going to a certain high school did not even pay 8th grade dues? So you technically took somebody else's money and sent it to somebody else's school who never put anything in the pot. So we had to have a real roundtable discussion on where those students' funds were going, because technically it didn't even belong to that scholar. So that was a whole thing within itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then we know it wasn't really a requirement, but we added some takeaways just because there were some things that we really noticed. First, like, obviously, it does cost more to properly educate disadvantaged students. We know that as educators. However, it kind of goes back to what you were saying. There's lots of things that we know to be true as educators that we cannot stop or we cannot prevent. Of course, a standardized test is not the best way to show knowledge. However, that is what the politicians say we have to do. Therefore, even though we know these students need more money, the politicians say, no, we cannot do that. So you have to do what the policies state. And then the public education system is now and has always been inequitable. And that is why we constantly preach, like, for things to be equitable, because we know it is not, it never has been, and sadly, it probably never will be.
And then some questions that we were left with after the case and after like actually processing our thoughts and talking back and forth was, is this a trickle-down effect from government officials from many years of disparity within the public school system? Followed by, is this where funding from Title I schools has developed fund? Because that's where I spent my past 5 years, and this year I'm not at a Title I school. And then, of course, can we possibly view this as propaganda in the school system? So Rachel had to remind me what propaganda was. So to your less fortunate schools, more so your Title I schools, of course, they may be all for it because it supports their scholars and their school needs as well as staffing. But then to the more fortunate schools, it can potentially bother them or rub them the wrong way because they will not be receiving the funding from the tax dollars like the other school. So we had to view it from both lenses.
Okay, very good. And so the answer to the question is, where did Title I money came out of? Basically, the Civil Rights Act of 65 led to the Elementary and Secondary Act of 1966. And that's where the 9 titles came from, titles 1 through 9. That's federal money, what was commonly known at that time, for those of us who were alive, as the Great Society. President Johnson's Great Society, you know, when President Kennedy was assassinated in '63, Lyndon Johnson became the president, and then we had the Great Society, which was the next big social reform movement after FDR's New Deal of the 30s and 40s. We had the Great Society of the 60s, and the first thing that came out of it, obviously, was the Civil Rights Act of 65. Followed the next year by the Elementary and Secondary Act, ESA, of 1966, which set aside the 9 titles that we know today. That's where that money came from. And it is an attempt, a federal attempt, to acknowledge that school funding has always been inequitable and to try to get some help to those children. But that's from the federal level. But you're right, we've always had inequity in state funding. But in North Carolina, there is no legal mandate to fix that. As long as a child gets a basic education, that's all the state says that they're required to get, and they're not mandated to get more than that. And the federal government tries to help out, but we know that that's still not enough. Title I is not enough. Now, one of the points that you made about stakeholders. You'll have people coming from far and near, and it'll look like that same group of idiots that pull off their shirts and fight every time you have a county-wide tax assessment meeting. And by the way, one of those idiots in one of my stops was my PTA president's husband. Every time they had one of those, he'd get arrested. He'd have his shirt off fighting, and he had grown kids. But you know, he every time they had a you know, any kind of a meeting on property tax or raising taxes at the county commission, he was there fighting. And so you not only will get parents, when you start talking about manipulating money and giving some schools or some parts of town or part of your district more money than others from your local budget. And that's why the Chapel Hill Carver superintendent was trying to circumvent. She knew that the stakeholders in that county, in that district, would never, not just the parents, but there would be people who didn't even have kids in school that would be there arguing against that. And like I said, I saw the video. The person who sounded the alarm was not a parent. She was a grandparent, but she wasn't a parent. And you know, I can tell you right now, she had fired up on her side in that meeting. I'd rather walk through hell with a gas can than fought that woman. You talking about mad? She was mad. And so that's the kind of strong emotion that you will engender when you start talking about manipulating local funds. You know, state funds are kind of you know, they're kind of a abstraction in federal funds, but when you start talking about local tax dollars and manipulating them, you better understand that stakeholders is more than parents. And so even though that you might have a majority of the parents agreeing with that, the people outside of that parent group will not. Just, you know, one of those words of caution. All right, our next group is Shalise and Evan and Letitia, and Robbie and Tamara. Yep, they're the next group.
All right, Shalise, do you want to go ahead and share the screen? That's okay, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, guys, thank you. All right, thank you so much for presenting. All right, so our group members are Shalise, Latasha, Robbie, Evan, and myself, Tamara. And next slide, please. All right, so our background and summary is that school-based budgeting funds were allotted to 4 schools last year based on the number of enrollment and the students' specific needs. And this was done in a piloted program. 4 schools did that, and they collected feedback from 4 principals in order to help with their decision to go school-wide, school-based budgeting school-wide for the district. This is what they're saying, that this will help with equity, transparency, and flexibility in school funding. And the principal wanted to get some feedback, or to get, you know, all stakeholders involved in the decision making. So he wrote them a letter, and in order to get them involved, maybe transparency, or to be transparent with the team. And how does this relate to the Leandro case? In the past, all students in district received the same amount regardless of their needs and enrollment numbers. And that's how the Leandro case came about versus the state of North Carolina. My team members are going to talk more about the Leandro case. And because of that, the families that were affected and 5 school districts, they filed a lawsuit in North Carolina. So my team members will talk more about the Leandro case.
Okay, so the Leandro versus State of North Carolina, 1994. In 1994, a lawsuit, of course, was filed against the state of North Carolina by parents, children, and school districts in 5 low-wealth rural counties. The higher than average tax rate and lower than average tax revenues, which means that they do not have enough money to provide an equal education for their children. Examples, of course, like some of the other groups also said, teacher pay, special services, and you know, the educational materials.
So the Leonardo case is a very interesting case to me. One of the things that we talked about and we realized is that this case started in 1997, and the children that they were advocating for in this case, Now their children are probably the ones, or their grandchildren will probably be the ones to benefit from the case because it is still ongoing. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So from 1997 to 2002, just like all the other groups have said, we had the 5 rural districts and some parents that sued the State Board of Education for lack of sufficient education for the children in their schools. The lower court found that every child has a constitutional right to a sound basic education. And before they can make any further rulings, they had to establish exactly what a sound basic education meant. So the criteria for a sound basic education was established. Basic education, just like Dr. Lab said, just basic, no super flyers or anything like that. Just what would be needed for them to graduate from high school and still be productive citizens. Then the state of North Carolina was found to have violated the students' rights to a sound basic education. Then from 2002 to present, 2004 to present, the lower court ruling, the defendants in the case filed a motion with the Supreme Court, North Carolina Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court upheld the lower court ruling. And the state also found that they provided to provide adequate funding for a sound education. So then the judge who had worked on this case for 19 years retired, and the case still was going on. So then during this time, a new judge was appointed to assigned to the case. Governor Ray Cooper created the Commission on Sound Basic Education. And then the plaintiffs in the case petitioned the court to for the state to get an outside group that was a neutral group to look at the case from both sides and come up with a plan or a solution that would be that would meet their demands and also would make ensure that the children were getting sound basic education. So they ended up hiring the West End group. The West End group studied the case. They studied all the documents in the case. They studied all the background information. They studied all the things with all the districts and the schools. And then they produced this document, extensive document. And their findings was that they identified the problem. They found 8 critical needs areas. And then they also came up with possible solutions that they suggested. The judge then ordered both sides to come up with a short-term plan, and the saga continues. So this just happened in 2020. So it's still going. It has not ended yet.
The pros of the superintendent's plan was it's not to reduce costs, but to improve productivity. As many have said, it got stakeholders involved, more people from the community, and also more staff development. When I say staff development, I mean more relevant staff development. A lot of times you're roped into staff development as a general district, but does it necessarily relate to your specific school or needs? And by having the funds to individualize your staff development, you can work towards what you need. Also, decisions made closest to the students. Just like with staff development is relevant to the students, a lot of students might need specialized programs that serves just your community, where a lot of times in districts, it's a broad program that's bought for the district and some teachers don't even use it and it's just money wasted because they have to buy a district license. But if you specialize just towards the students, it can meet their needs. It spreads the area to high needs, as we said just now, capitalizing, focusing on just the needs of your students. Next slide. Some of the disadvantages, like we said before, it's not legal. There's some manipulation of the funds and how they're given. The policy is not good unless the community commission approves of it, and we said that it's illegal, and you know that it's against the law. Now, while it may seem like good ethics in order to give your certain students the money or certain schools the money, it's unethical because even though you're giving to whom you perceive as the most needed, it should be spread equally throughout. And because when this happens, it can divide the district and the people of the district. You know, sometimes they feel a certain way because although they might have the money in the school, they see another school getting that and they feel deprived and depraved. Next slide. Who has that one?
On September 1st, I thought I had the last slide, but it's okay. On September 1st, Judge David Lee signed a consent order in the Leandro case. And you know, this is just an alert to let you know. The plan would require the additional 426.9 million in state funds, with about 237 million for teachers. On September 3rd, 2020, of course, this is the most recent incident, the NC General Assembly convened the Appropriate Cares Act. Money left town with no response to a consent order. In December 2020, Judge Lee granted an extension to the governor and the NC State Board of Education to allow them more time to present the 8-year plan for implementing the West Ed recommendations. The plan was due to Judge Lee on February 15, 2021. So just this past month, but has again been extended, this time on March 8, 2021. If this plan is accepted, then the NCGA will be obligated to fund the plan starting with the 2-year budget cycle. The NCGA does not respond, or if the NCGA does not respond, it begs the question, can the NCGA be sued to comply with the court order? Stay tuned. Stay up to date with the coalition we are part of, Every Child NC, for more information on the news of the Leandro case at this point in time.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right. It's now time for my traditional role to insult at least half of you. All right, so let's do a little rundown based on what they just told you. All right. James Martin was governor from 85 to 93, right after the basic ed ruling. And you know, the basic ed plan was put in 84. He was the governor. He was Republican. Folks weren't happy with what was going on in schools. So as soon as Governor Hunt got his second 8-year term again, he came in 93. That's when Leandro, the state was sued. You had a governor who was sympathetic, but again, you had a General Assembly mostly Republican. And so that's how Leandro got traction. So during the years of the Hunt governorship from 93, but then the ruling came out against them, but then you had the Easley again, you had a continuation of a Democratic administration in the governor's office fighting the General Assembly, which was Republican. Now, remembering who controls the purse strings, that would be the General Assembly. And so it looked like Leandro was going to gain traction again, and then McCrory got elected, and so Republicans again, everything on the back burner. Roy Cooper got in, Democrat again in the governor's office. He brought it back up, the West Ed Commission, you know, did all those things, and you saw what happened. The General Assembly, you know, appropriated CARES money and went home, didn't even respond to the consent order. So there's been a history of the folks who actually control the purse strings reluctance to put any money behind this. And even though there's been additional rulings in Leandro that said you're not meeting, you know, the standard of a basic education, that the General Assembly continues to say, go fish, we're not giving you the money. The saga continues. And so the point of the case tonight is that you got to follow the law and do the legal things, but that even though you might agree that it's the right thing to do, remember, politicians don't always go with what courts decide or what they're supposed to do. They're elected officials, and they decide we'll take the risk, or you know, there won't be any personal repercussions on me, and my constituency will continue to vote me in to the state legislature as long as I don't give these people this money. And so even though there should be more money coming, they refuse to appropriate it. Now, what's going to happen in the end, I don't know. Now, the General Assembly in North Carolina no longer holds a supermajority, but they still have a solid majority. And so I don't know that there's going to be any changes in the funding anytime soon. The only way that you're going to get that is if you have a Republican, a Democrat in the governor's office and a Democratic controlled state legislature. That's the only way I see that's going to happen. Now, if you don't want it to happen, then you got to continue to vote for the Republicans. If you don't want to see the money distributed. So, you know, whichever side of the argument on, I hope I've insulted both of you, but but it's the politics of it that keep it from getting changed and maintain the status quo. Now, I'm going to give you a quick and dirty on Charlotte-Mecklenburg. In the late 90s, it came to light that the local school board had appropriated and had been approved by the county commissioners $4 million for an equity program called the High School Challenge in 3 of the at-risk high schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, 3 high schools: Garinger, West Charlotte, West Meck. They approved $4 million for an equity project at those 4. That became such, you would have thought $4 million was all the money in the world. People screamed, yelled, and a group of Republicans banded together called the Gang of Five and rode that single $4 million issue into them all getting elected and getting on the county commissioners. And of course, the first thing they did, of course, was stop the $4 million. Now, whichever side of the argument you're on, let me give you a little rundown on that. That $4 million, and I've done the math, was 1/4 of 1% of the budget. Let me say that again. It was 1/4 of 1% of the school budget. And you would have thought it was all the money in the world. And people voted a Republican majority in the county commissioners for the first time in modern times, over $4 million. That was going to, and Judge Manning had said, you got to do something for these high schools. He's the judge you're talking about that retired. Judge Manning said, you got to do something. They appropriated $4 million out of a budget of $1.6 billion. They appropriated $4 million at the behest of the judge in this case. Just $4 million, which was just front pocket money. Light your cigar with it money. I mean, just nothing. 1/4 of 1%, and it changed the entire political trajectory of the county. People were so incensed over $4 million out of a $1.6 billion budget. So you can imagine when they start talking about, you know, you need to put another $500 million in schools. People in Charlotte-Mecklenburg lost their mind over $4 million. 1/4 of 1% of the total school budget. So it's not about the dollar figure, folks. That's my point in telling you that it's not about the dollar figure. That's immaterial. It can't be. $4 million out of a $1.6 billion budget is nothing. It's not about the dollar amount. It's the idea of equity that some people just can't. They believe that that's a handout and not a hand up, and they just can't go for that. It might speak to privilege or whatever, but it's not the dollar amount. Don't be confused about the dollar amount. It's not about how much. It's that you give them anything. You're giving them anything, and there is a large segment of stakeholders that just cannot or will not find it in their heart to agree to that, no matter how little or how much. And so I don't hold out as much hope as I one time did. I'm not being pessimistic, but what I'm telling you is that you got to follow the law, because people are going to be watching this like a hawk, just like that grandmother was in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and she was fired up. That the thought that somebody might take something from her baby, her grandbaby, that she might not get, 50 cents over the course of her entire career in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, was just untenable for that grandmother. So this is a highly charged issue, and it's more than just dollars. There's a lot more overtones than just dollars in this case, is what you need to understand, and you need to steer clear of. All right, we have our last group tonight that got to go first last time. We got Joy and Tamarla and Michelle.
Yes, sir.
All right,
All righty.
hit it.
Okay, our OMA case study. Tamarla Adams, Michelle Coleman, Joy O'Neill, and Miss LaQuisha Wilkins. First up, Miss Coleman.
Leandra Law. Lawsuit was filed by parents in various school districts stating students were not receiving equal funding. Low-income districts were not receiving adequate funding based on their educational needs. The court decided that all students in the state of North Carolina have a constitutional right to a sound basic education. However, all counties and school districts in North Carolina are not entitled to equal funding.
So the pros and cons of this issue, some of the pros based on the letter that the superintendent wrote was parents and community are involved, provides funds for staffing to serve some of the special populations. Schools can meet their goals, money follows the students, and then it's used to empower leaders. As stated earlier by another group, some of the pros were also some cons. It was kind of difficult to find some pros because like others groups stated, illegal is illegal, but the cons were superintendent was not specific and leaves questions for parents and staff. It doesn't follow the Leandra law. The law states students should have a sound basic education and they can receive a sound basic education without the funding. It was not equitable. The staff has to be innovative in finding other ways to meet special populations' needs, but differentiated instruction, which sometimes that can be difficult for teachers to do, especially if they have a lot of diverse populations within their classroom. Parents and community are involved, like somebody stated earlier, that can open up for a lot of issues. And then schools that do not have a high population of students with disadvantages will lose funds. And then at the end of the day, it's illegal.
Now, Dr. Lamb, we did have like a huge group discussion on a couple of things that we would like for you to elaborate on, please. For example, Ms. Wilkins had brought up something and I was in agreement to this. How would funding follow students if students transfer from one school to another? For example, like talking about Turning Point, you know, like if a student moves from Huff High School because they're sent to Turning Point, how would that funding transfer to Turning Point?
You get the money comes every month on your ADM. It doesn't come for the year. Remember, when the state gives you the flat grant funding money of $8,000 per year per pupil, it comes in monthly installments. It doesn't come all in one time. And so when that student moves to Turning Point, then Turning Point gets that money. Now, in a case like Turning Point, there's alternative and safe school funds that funds their basic program. That pays the faculty and sets the faculty. That's in 2010, and that's the last year I can speak to because I was in charge of it then. We had $40 million that was our base money from safe and alternative school funds that set that school up and opened it. And then the money that came to it during the year for operating was based on when the students came, the money came for them.
Okay.
And remember, it's monthly. It's not yearly. The money comes every month.
Okay. Then the other question Ms. Wilkins kept bringing up was ESA.
Yeah.
You know, like she brought it up and she was talking about how does it relate? Like it had to be illegal because of ESA. Can you elaborate on that?
All right. So ESA's Elementary and Secondary School Act, the first one was passed in '66. And what they said in ESA is the federal will provide some Title I and some EC money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, you get that. But what happens if you have disadvantaged kids that don't fall under Title I or exceptional ed? That's the whole notion here. And so, but according to the federal government, as long as they give money for Title I and EC, then, and so every Student Succeeds Act, you're talking about that one at elementary and secondary school. So we use those kind of interchangeably. The follow-up to, the original elementary and secondary was Every Student Succeeds. They just changed the name of that one. But it's just a reauthorization of those same funds. And so the federal government said, we're going to give you money for EC. We're going to give you federal money for Title I disadvantaged kids for reading and math. But that's it. That's all you're entitled to. And the state doesn't have to give you anything other than those federal monies. And so that's how they get away with that is that they just point to the federal money that's coming for those kids. And so what the argument there is that if you don't fall in one of those two categories, you don't need extra money anyway. We know that's not true, but that's the argument, that the feds had you covered on both of those. And so we're not required to give you any more money.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We kept it short because we knew we would be last. So we kept it short and simple for you, Dr. Lamb, and then our references of what we did.
That's great. Well, thank you for your presentations tonight. And so,
Dr. Lamb, I have a question about the ADM. I'm sorry, I have a question about the ADM. So is that why right now they're trying to waive the ADM to allow the funding from prior to COVID-19 because school districts ADMs are going down and therefore funding would go down?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The funding formula is average daily membership, not how many people you have on the roll, but how many are attending. And then, it was easy to count attendance when if you were sitting in your seat, you were there, but it's not as easy to count attendance when you're online. And so what the school districts are saying, it's impossible for them to come up with realistic attendance numbers because of the digital divide. Some kids don't have internet and some don't have computers, but they're still participating and they're still working remotely. They're still, they're still there, but you say, well, they're still on the roll. Well, doesn't matter how many's on the roll. We've never funded on how many are on the roll. We only fund on how many attend, average daily membership. And so since we don't have a good handle on how to count who's participating and who isn't, what they're asking for is to revert back to former ADM, that whatever that percentage was. And remember, we subtract on a monthly basis from your $8,000, which is $800 monthly. We subtract the percentage, the absence rate. So if your attendance for the month is 95 on your ADM, 95%, we only give you 95% of that $800 for that kid that month, or $8,000 on the yearly basis. And so what school districts are saying is we don't have a clue. We can't prove to you how many kids are attending right now. We can tell you how many are on the roll, but we can't tell you how many are attending. And so because we don't have a way to adequately do that, we're asking for you to do a waiver, hold us harmless, and fund us at previous levels is what they're asking for them to do. It's just like this class. We've been online now for 5 years fully. I don't count whether you show up or not, because since we're asynchronous, you could not come online with me this week, but as long as you do your work, you've turned your work in on Blackboard by Sunday night at 9 or Monday, whenever, then you're present that week. And see, that's the way most school districts are doing now with Canvas, is that you don't have to attend a live video session during the week. As long as you are turning your work in, we count you as present. And that's what these districts are saying to the state is, everybody can't, the state's saying, well, were they there live? Did you take attendance when you had your live sessions? Well, yeah, but everybody that's participating didn't attend live. And if we go to that, we're going to lose half of our funding. And so.
Thank you. Just because that makes everything so much clearer to me, because, I am teaching completely virtual right now, even though my county is in Plan A, but there's, families who've chosen to be virtual, and I'm virtual, and we have 7 different ways to count attendance.
Exactly.
And so, and we're all like, why do we have this is crazy.
Yeah.
But now that makes a lot more sense. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So we've established, like at Gardner Webb, since we've been in it for a while, we've established Blackboard turn-in as attendance. If you were following along and turning your work in, whether you're coming to the video sessions or not, whether you're attending, whatever, whether you're doing it, as long as the work gets in by the end of the week, we count you as present. Now, there's problems with that. I freely acknowledge that. But, we finally figured out, the university says that you have to attend 75% of the time in order for us to give you a grade. Well, what if we don't require you to come to the class every week? How do we count it then? And so we've come to an accommodation. But the state being new, forced into this, they don't have a standardized way to count attendance across the state. And because different districts are doing it that way, and like Rachel said, they're using 7 different ways in her one district alone. The better solution is just ask for a waiver and go back to previous levels. And I think that is a much better solution until you have figured out a way to count attendance better than they have, or a standardized way across every district. But again, if it has to do with technology, again, the lower wealth districts are going to be left behind on that, because again, their folks don't have the technology. And so
Dr. Lamb, I would like to mention, we've gone on conferences in Florida, and I've heard that comment. As a tech facilitator, we'll go and they'll see our technology coming from Charmec, and they'll say, how did y'all get that? And we'll tell them the district purchased it for us. And then I've had questions from other staff in CMS. Why haven't they updated our technology, blah, blah, blah. Why they got state funding, and I have to explain to them that the funding doesn't come from the state.
That's right.
That's how I knew that, because I knew where the money came from.
Perfect example. A perfect example of what we're talking about tonight is the state got out of capital funding in '66, and they declared that computers and technology in '84, they declared that was going to be capital. And again, the Leandro case was a test case to try to challenge the constitutionality in the state court of the basic ed plan, because it didn't allow for modern times. I mean, we've got to prepare our kids more than a basic education just to finish high school and, worthy home membership and be able to get a job or go to the military. Our schools have to be better than that. Because what will happen is, if they don't, you will lose market share. And I'll give you one last example, and I'll go to our resident principals to close tonight. My brother-in-law had two children. The oldest is four years older than the youngest. And to what we're talking about tonight, the first child that came along, the daughter, very brilliant child. And her parents were so angry when she got in the 11th grade that she had to start her day at a high school different than her home high school in order to get her AP courses. And she did that every semester, her junior and senior years. They rotated them around. They did not have the funds in that low wealth district to offer the full variety of AP courses at every high school. So they would have a group over here for AP Chem would be over here at this high school, and AP Stat would be at this high school. And so he was so angry that when the second child came along, he pulled that child out and went to charter, which I have nothing against charter schools. But the notion here is, if you start pulling money away from one group to give to the other, and even though they might be the upper kids and more advantaged and come from better, you will have flight away from your district. And so this notion of equity, yes, we want to do well for all kids, but on the other hand, you have upper end parents of upper end kids in terms of their ability, that when they perceive that they're not getting all that their child is entitled to, they will flee. They have options. And so part of what we're doing here as well is we're playing to that crowd as well. We're trying to straddle that divide as well in public education. Now, my solution to that is going back to the origins of public education. When we had private schools before in this country, before we had a country, you understand that we had private schools back in the 1700s. We had private schools before, and public schools were provided in the preamble of the Constitution that states may provide, public education. And so I've always seen our mission as every child, from the lowest to the highest. That's our mission. And if we lose the upper end, then that's certainly their right to opt out into private or charter or somewhere else. But there's a lot of folks who don't feel that way, that we have to accommodate that upper end many times at the expense of the lower end in order to keep them in, those stakeholders in our schools. I'm guessing that they have money and political clout, and I guess that's the argument. But certainly, if you pull resources, whether it be locally or at the state level, if you pull resources from the upper end kids, you will see flight. And so that has been fought tooth and nail for the last 30 years in North Carolina. That fight of, we know that Leandro says you can't move the money, but Leandro says you get a sound basic education. We've proven more cases than one over the last 20 years that that's not happening, 21, 22 years that that's not happening. But the folks who are in charge of the money are afraid, or their constituents don't want the money moved. And they continue to elect them to public office. And so the money doesn't get moved. And whether that's right, wrong, good or bad, whichever side of the political fence you're on, that's just what is. For school administrators, my charge to you is stay out of that political fight. That's above your pay grade, and follow the law. Do the best you can with the students that you got, and follow the law. But you can't, it might be a noble quest or a noble cause, but you're going to lose your house if you don't follow the law. That's what you're supposed to learn from the end. All right, principals, in any order that you'd like to go, wrap us up.
Well, I would just like to say I am really enjoying the case studies. I appreciate the fact that I learned something from each of you. And at this stage of my life, it's always nice to know that I can learn from those around me. And just, I love all your perspectives. Everybody has a little bit of a different twist, even though you're coming from the same case study. And just great job. Really enjoyed tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to echo that too. I appreciate that. You, like you said, I'm still learning, and you have to be that way as an administrator. Always learn, always look to learn, always read, and be able to grow. That's the whole point, in my opinion.
Thank you both. And remember, I know it's a long night, and we do the same one, but again, this is how we collaborate. This is how we communicate. This is how you have to do the work when you're a school administrator. Everybody gets to have their perspective. It doesn't do any good for us to split up and do different case studies. The whole notion of how we do case studies is everybody has a different perspective, and we have to respect that. And we have to give everybody the opportunity to communicate their wishes, desires, what they feel, their thoughts, their emotions. Everybody, that's that part of communicating that we have to do, and part of that conflict resolution, conflict management as we go along. And so it makes for long nights, but it's, again, y'all are doing a great job. Probably the best group we've ever had in terms of getting the case studies and getting them right. The follow-up is good. I shout out to Chris. I really liked his reflection on the last case study. I thought he did an excellent job summarizing that. Y'all are getting it. Y'all are doing great. You're doing great on, the AMA has been great. The scores have been great. I can't wait to begin to see some of those skips. We're going to come back in 2 weeks from tonight with our next class. And so hopefully, remember, I'm here every day. I'm grading, giving feedback. I want to see some of those skip task ones start coming in. I'm excited about seeing those. Your case studies are great. Everything is good. I'm so proud that Dominique's back with us tonight. She's doing better. Again, prayers for our other folks who, LaQuisha and having a senior moment here, but prayers for everybody that's ailing or got problems or medical issues. Prayers for all of you. Let's see. I think I'm gonna check my notes before we go. Cassandra, prayers for Cassandra as well. So I thank everybody for being with us tonight, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Everybody be safe. Get your shots if you can. Good night.
Thank you.